There we go. So now it should be a T. I just switched it. And the mic's not on yet.
Welcome. I'm Tim Fitzpatrick. I'm the renewable energy reporter for the Salt Lake Tribune. And I want to start first by giving the microphone to my boss. Holly Mullen is the editor of the Tribune's Innovation Lab. And I'm one of the mad scientists in the innovation lab.
Tim has the most fun anyway. And you can't have anything without a commercial right before the main feature anymore. So thank you for everybody coming today. It is my honor to be the editor of the Innovation Lab and to, help in some small way to do this kind of really important community engagement. You may or may not be aware that the Salt Lake Tribune is now a nonprofit, and really one of our missions is to get involved in our communities, and that's a big, wide group of people. And Tim, of course, is charged in our partnership with Rocky Mountain Power to get a lot of this renewable energy information out there and meet with our public and an expanded audience. So I just want to thank you all. Would love you to subscribe to the Salt Lake Tribune, and if you can even do more, we do take donations. Fully nonprofit now, so we do have kind of a whole different model now, keeping us chugging along. And I think there's probably a slide about that at the end, right? There used to be. We'll see. Okay. Don't worry about it. Have a good time, and here's Tim. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Welcome to Volts and Bolts. This is the second of a series of community conversations on renewable energy transition in Utah. The first was held at the University of Utah a couple of months ago. We wanted to do this one at Weaver during National Drive Electric Week. I want to start with some thank yous. First, I want to thank Rocky Mountain Power for sponsoring this event and also for providing the grant for my position. The Tribune maintains editorial control, but we couldn't do it without Rocky Mountain Power. We appreciate their commitment to independent journalism. I also want to thank Weaver State University, the marketing department, the sustainability department. The folks here are helping with the audiovisual stuff, and in particular, I want to thank Weaver's Automotive Technology Department. I didn't really realize when I came up here that I was tapping into such a robust program, and it really is impressive. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. All the way down on the end is Jessica Slater. She's the department head for the Department of Automotive Technology. She started with the department as an administrative assistant when she was still in college, and she never left. Instead, she clawed her way to the top. And she is very, she spent her most recent years as a student advisor, and so she is very tapped into the attitudes of students who are coming into the program and who are considering the program. James Campbell, right next to me, is Director of Innovation and Sustainability Policy at Rocky Mountain Power. Before joining in 2007, he worked for Governor John Huntsman, where he led the governor's Renewable Energy Initiative and Blue Ribbon Advisory Council for Climate Change. James has extensive experience in developing and implementing clean energy solutions, including the $50 million effort to build out EV charging network in Utah. John Kelly, in the middle, is a 32-year professor of automotive technology at Weaver State University. He specializes in hybrid and electric vehicle research and curriculum development for both online delivery and face-to-face classes. In addition, John shares much of his research with the rest of the world. Weaver Auto YouTube, 40 million views. It's kind of stunning, and it's really basically just one guy doing it for a long time, and it's looking just incredibly valuable. Okay, so thanks to all of you for joining. Let's have the next slide, please. So why electric? Why is the transportation going electric? It's really two reasons. One of them is environmental. Transportation contributes about half the air pollution along the West Edge front. It also, burning of fossil fuels is the largest contributor to climate change. Transportation contributes about 27% of that. Now, it's worth noting that Rocky Mountain Power gets its power from fossil fuels, some of that, but that is changing like almost daily. And right now, less than half the power comes from coal, and only about 20% comes from natural gas. But again, the growth is all on the renewable side. So that is cleaning things up. You don't have to. And then the other reason basically is because electric is superior technology. We've now gotten to a point where it works better. We don't need to wait for a new technology to transition away from fossil fuels. It's here. It's not as easy as just turning on the light to convert, but basically, you don't have to convert to an electric car to save the world. You can do it to save money and do it for yourself. It's still the right decision. Okay, so the next slide, please. The EV revolution. California drives the market. Right now, about 18% of new cars sold in California are electric. That will be 100% by 2035. California itself is the 10th largest car market in the world, and it very much drives what happens in Utah. We have nearly all the used electric cars in Utah coming from California. And California's insistence on clean cars basically has made cars cleaner in Utah. That's been going on for 40 years. Okay, so Tesla. There is, of course, I'm not criticizing about Tesla, but there's no argument that they beat everyone to the punch. We are all farther down the EV road today because Tesla took a big bet. There really isn't anything in the last half century that's trying to scale up the car market successfully. But they did it, and they didn't just do that, they had to build a charging network too to make it fly. So, good on them. Okay, and then the Inflation Reduction Act. The government wants to pay you to buy an electric car. They will pay you up to $7,500 for a new car and $4,000 for a used one. You have to qualify for it. There's a lot of money out there, and that's if you can find it. This demand is outstripping supply. People are waiting months for their cars, but they are coming, and there will be by 2024 there will be 130 different electric models. Virtually every manufacturer will have an electric car available. There are some requirements around the federal funding that's they're trying to build up domestic sourcing. It's basically China dominates the lithium battery market. That's becoming a national security issue. And so incentives are favoring those that develop, that are built globally or built domestically. And that's kind of a complicated equation. But basically, there will be a growing number of cars that will qualify for that. And it will continue at least until 2030 unless another Congress kills it. I'm going to ask James to give his perspective. EV transition will roll out in the coming years, please.
Tim, thanks for hosting this. I do, in North Park, definitely support journalism.
It takes a minute, that's the problem.
And to our hosts at Weber State University, this is first time I've been to this campus, so I'm pretty excited about this. I mean, this is an impressive facility, so I really enjoy this and like to see this campus really continue to grow and become an integral part of the Weber State network. So how do I see EVs, the rollout as this as an event. So, as I think as Tim mentioned, right now we've kind of hit this transition. Where I remember when I first started working on EV infrastructure and trying to promote, get folks to adopt EVs, we were always more in this demand constraint that was trying to get people to be willing to go out and buy an EV. They call them the innovators, early innovators who go out there and they either like the gadget, they buy the gadget, or they were really passionately environmentally focused. And so they were the ones that would go out and buy this. But then with these really good adopted by the broader community, average everyday people. And that was always that question. And I think now we finally have transitioned over to this next phase of adoption. There's it's called the S curve of technology adoption. This is what every piece of technology is experienced, whether you're talking about the washing machine, the cell phone, the VCR, all of it all follow the same pattern, which is slow growing, and then all of a sudden it shoots up. And so we're right now at this transition where we're pretty close to this inflection point that's going to take off. Entering new folks who are going to do this. But we're also at a point where we don't have systems in place to really build these out in the supply chain. And so really, finally, the OEMs are starting to make vehicles that people want. But to get that rolled out, can they build it? The biggest limitation right now is can they build factories fast enough to put in the cost? So that's what we see right now is with Tesla, GM, Ford, all of them is they're investing billions and billions of dollars trying to build factories with batteries so they can make EVs. So really we'll see in the really next couple of years, probably starting next year, we're really starting to peak in 24, I think, is when we'll start really seeing that battery supply coming into the market and then really allowing for a lot more vehicles. The other aspect of the kind of the constraint, so we kind of shifted from this consumer demand constraint to where now we're actually at this supply constraint. The other, I would say, limiting factor is infrastructure, charging infrastructure. And can we get that rolled out as well as the increase in demand is there, that more of these vehicles come on? Can we put the charging infrastructure so folks can get these? And we have a plan, we're rolling that out. We're partnering with the state as well. As part of there's been a big federal infrastructure investment called the IIJA, where they're investing, the federal government's investing $7 billion nationwide. The state of Utah is getting $36 million of that. We're Recommend Power, we're investing $50 million on top of that. So in the next few years, you're looking at about $86 million or so of direct dollars going into the state of Utah to put this infrastructure, this charging infrastructure, to allow, really, once these vehicles are available, to allow you to go anywhere throughout the state. That's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be putting infrastructure in so you can go down to the southern part of the state, the eastern part of the state, the western part, anywhere. And you can be confident. We're going to own and operate it. What we want to do is make sure you're confident that that charger will work when you get there throughout that state. And we're going to make a 10-year commitment to keep those in good, well working order. We're also hoping to put in infrastructure along the Wasatch Front as well, including in Ogden and in Layton as well, and throughout the Salt Lake County and even in Utah County too. So we're going to put a robust charging network in place so really you can get anywhere you want to go. But that's kind of where I see the EV market as we're moving out. That really we're going to see a pretty dynamic growth in the next few years, and that once these vehicles start coming in mass production, they're going to be it's going to change the way our transportation systems operate. That is for sure.
Thank you, James. Next slide, please. Okay, we've lifted up the hood. I guess we've taken everything apart on. This is just a little Wikimedia drawing I found somewhere, but it illustrates essentially what's changing. The biggest thing, of course, is powertrain. You don't have an engine anymore. What you have instead, an internal combustion engine. What you have instead is these motors that sit right on the axles, and in most cases there will be two of them, which means that you'll still have four-wheel drive. I mean, that's very important to a lot of people in Utah. And then the other thing, another significant difference is what they call regenerative braking. And this is something that started with the hybrids back in the Prius days. And I'm going to physics geek out on you a little bit here, because regenerative braking is, it sort of shows the beauty of electricity. It is, with one device, you can put in electricity and get motion, or you can put in motion and get electricity. That to me is just like, it's magic, you know? You can't step on the brakes and make gasoline. This is really just one of the true advantages of electric vehicles, is that ability to capture your emotion when you're stopped and use it. So then the other thing, basically, let's see what else I want to say. That might be just about it. I got another bullet point on there, don't I? No, I guess I don't. With that, I guess I'm just going to, I know what I was going to say. Weight, they're heavier. They're like maybe about 20% heavier. I'm not sure exactly. I think there's going to be safety implications around that. We're going to see how that goes. But one thing I will say is that weight is very low. The center of gravity it's very hard to roll a Tesla. Basically, they sit very low, and so even though they're heavier, they're still not going to be flying, rotating very much. And then I put on autonomous on here too, because honestly, autonomous has nothing to do with electric. You can have an autonomous vehicle, self-driving vehicle, either way. My impression is that self-driving has rolled out a little slower than people have thought. I'm looking over here at the expert. As a person of my age, this is an important thing to me. I plan on being in that first generation of people whose kids don't take away the keys, because I can just roll into the back seat and let it drive itself. So keep working on that autonomous. And with that, I'd like to throw to John just to give his perspective on how the technology has gotten to this point. It started with hybrids, the plug-in hybrids, everything else, and then where it's going to go from there. So please, John.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to be here. The world's first mass-produced hybrid electric vehicle was the Toyota Prius, and it went up for sale 24 years ago this year. So that technology's been around a long time. But an interesting thing about that car, and we have one of the first generation Priuses here that we still use for training. It's fully functional. Is that the parts, the systems that are on that car, that were developed for that car, are still used today on the modern vehicles of today. There are common parts that are on these vehicles, regardless of the brand. We have several different brands of vehicles that we use in our training. I don't even care what the brand is. I can go in and find these common parts, these common components that every vehicle has. It's kind of like with an internal combustion engine powered vehicle. You have an engine, you have a transmission, you have an axle. Well, hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, they have these same common parts. And so what I've been concentrating on is researching and teaching what these parts are, what they do, how to diagnose and repair them, so that when you buy an electric vehicle and there's something happens to it that needs some sort of diagnosis and repair, that we've got somebody out there that can do that. Now, even though there's a lot of, even though most of these vehicles have these common components on them, they're not all as efficient as each other, and they don't all have the same characteristics, the same efficiencies. For example, California earlier this year announced that they want manufacturers to start publishing the efficiencies of the electronics on their vehicles, these common components. So, for example, there's a part on an electric vehicle called a DC to DC converter, and it replaces a part that you might be familiar with called an alternator on any other vehicle. Electric vehicles don't have alternators, so they have this other part called the DC to DC converter. And there are some vehicles that I have in the shop that the DC to DC converter is 87% efficient, which means we're losing 13% of the electrical energy used to keep the 12-volt battery charged to heat. It's just gone. And yet I've got other vehicles over there that are 95% efficient in the same part. And so it's like having vehicles that have different fuel economies, even though they might have the same engine, might have the same powertrain, there's different efficiencies. And so we can only build cars right now that are certain lengths and widths and weights. We have to keep the cost down to a certain point, but everybody wants a car that can drive more miles. And you can drive more miles on a car that has more efficient electronics in it than a car that has less efficient electronics, even if it has the same batteries. And so the transition from hybrids to plug-in hybrids to electric vehicles, technologically, as far as service work and repair work, it hasn't been a big deal. To go from a hybrid to a plug-in hybrid, there's a lot of complexity there because you still have the internal combustion engine and all the plug-in hybrid parts that an EV would have. So that's kind of the worst of both. Although a plug-in hybrid is a good solution for a lot of people that maybe they don't have a place to plug in an electric vehicle, and so it's kind of a good, I call it a gateway car, kind of like a gateway drug. Once you drive a plug-in hybrid on electric power, you don't want to drive on internal combustion engine after that. And so then we get into electric vehicles, which mechanically are very simple, very few moving parts. It's fun to work on and fun to explore. But then we have all these differences in efficiencies, not only in efficiencies, but in their design. There are some cars that can recharge their high voltage batteries very quickly, and there's others that can't. And yet they might have the exact same size battery, they have these same common components on them, but what's the difference? Well, the difference is in how the vehicle was designed. How well can it handle the heat? As these batteries are charged, they get hot, and you've got to get that heat out of there. So you've got to have a really good battery cooling system. And right now, nobody beats Tesla in the battery cooling system department. And so as you drive the vehicle, the battery gets hot. As you want to recharge the vehicle, it gets hot. You've got to remove that heat. Some vehicles can't remove the heat as efficiently, and so they limit their recharging rate. When you go to one of these charging stations, they're going to be set up. In one branded car, it may take an hour and a half to charge, where another brand might take 45 minutes. And the difference is in the technologies. And so education is what we do here at Weber State, and education is going to help the common person interested in buying an electric vehicle determine the differences between electric vehicles. There's some that have a really good reputation and have some really good systems on them, and some that are just some that I would recommend you stay away from. But, But there's all of them are slowly improving every year, and they're getting better and better. And let me give you one example. We've got a Tesla Model S sitting just outside the door out here. You can see it when you walk out. That car, when we first got it, I think had a rating of the driving range of around 307 miles, if I remember right. And then Tesla did a software update, and it's an all-wheel drive Model S. Tesla did a software update on it and increased the range to 370 miles. And that's a massive increase. So how did they do that? And what they ended up doing, which I now see a lot of other automobile manufacturers doing the same thing, is you don't need all-wheel drive the majority of the time that you're driving. So that car in the normal driving mode is a front-wheel drive Tesla. And the rear motor just free spins. And if you need traction, if you need to accelerate heavily, then the rear motor comes in. But during normal driving, it's a front-wheel drive vehicle, which makes it more efficient, which means without changing the battery to a bigger battery, we're using less power to drive one motor instead of two, and now all of a sudden we've got 370 miles instead of 307. So we have training classes here where we teach technicians, and we invite the general public to take these classes too, to learn the differences between different EVs, different systems, and the advantages and disadvantages of each of those. So is that good enough?
Thank you, John. John has taught 18 boot camps, and he told me that basically, mostly it's teachers. It's people who, he is training the trainers, because there is, he's 15 years ahead, basically, of everybody else, is what's going on. Okay, so next slide, please. What does it mean for technicians? For all the profound differences in electric cars, there's also much that is still the same. Things like steering and suspension are largely the same. They still have hydraulic brakes in addition to the regenerative brakes. Those still need to be maintained. You don't have engine oil changes, but you still have to lubricate them. There's still lots of things to do. And the biggest challenge for technicians is really a knowledge gap. You might not be able to do it all just on John's YouTubes, but basically that is the biggest challenge for anybody who has grown up in the internal combustion world and is trying to make this transition. It's not so much about equipment, it's really just your knowledge base. And a big part of that knowledge too is around safety. That on a regular gas-powered car, you never have to deal with more than 12 volts. And now, what are the voltage in these cars?
Clear up to 800 right now.
Yeah, and that's you don't want to be messing with that. And so there's a whole bunch of procedures, policies, protocols that need to be emphasized early. Weber is also going into high schools and helping high school auto mechanics teachers. And we all know that what high school kids are capable of doing. And so, they're trying to teach them. They've been dealing with gasoline, they've been dealing with other dangerous things, but this is different, so they will have to face up to that. And this is where I want to turn to Jessica, just to get a perspective on what prospective auto technicians in the EVH need to know, what they should know, what they should be working on, what is their attitudes, anything else you want to share that way, please.
Thank you. Well, first I want to thank the state of Utah for recognizing the need and the necessity for training this workforce. We've secured a Talent Ready Utah grant to purchase vehicles for ourselves and our technical education partners. We've secured 2 strategic workforce initiative grants. We're going into the high schools as well, providing vehicles and training. So it's nice to know that the state recognizes our purpose and our need as well. As far as students, I do find that those that have not yet been exposed to hybrid and electric vehicle, they're still coming to us really excited about horsepower and combustion engines. But once we expose them to it and we show them the complexity and the technology, they do get really excited and more confident and more comfortable with that technology. So by introducing it at the high school level, primarily safety first always, we're building a workforce that's more comfortable with that. Another thing would be we're working with in-state and out-of-state schools, making it possible for students to transfer into our hybrid and electric vehicle training, making it available not only statewide, but with our surrounding partners. Anything else, Tim?
Unless you've got anything else. Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so we do have some questions. I've got a couple here, and I'm also, I welcome questions from the audience. EVs are still a very small percentage of cars on Utah roads. What is needed for a wider swath of Utahns to adopt EVs? I'm asking this of all three of you.
Well, I think that the biggest issue is cost, where I think it's changed. A few years ago, there was concern about convenience and performance and stuff like that. But that's done. I mean, I think going back to where it's interesting if you look at actually the automakers when the original. Toyota was very successful with the Prius in the sense that they used it as a halo car, like, okay, we're this environmentally conscious. And then you look at some of the early EVs that GM did and some of the other companies, they really tried to focus on a very niche target audience. And I met with some automotive executives, and they basically were saying, we're not going to make one single more EV than we have to, because they were doing it as compliance vehicles, and so they were just doing this as kind of because they had to, so they're going to just target it for a very specific audience, so they had to. Tesla came around and showed, no, this is actually a performance vehicle. So now that I think that's out, that secret's out, everybody knows how much it is, and if you then look at now the next generation of vehicles, which are like trucks, like the Rivian and the F-150 Lightning, now that you're getting this performance at a whole nother level. So the big barrier now is primarily cost, and then also there's still some slightly concerns of they call it range anxiety. Am I going to be able to refuel my vehicle? Even though some of that's I think an education issue, because 80% of refueling or recharging is going to happen at your home or work, right? So this is where EVs are really transformative compared to the current system of refueling, gas stations. Your starting point, you have your refueling at home or work, or your ending point, you have whether it's another home or work. And so it's only you have to refuel it in between. And the only time that requires is long distance traveling, or if you're a fleet operator and you put on lots of miles where you have to recharge it. So even though there's a psychological thing, there's a lot of people like, oh, well, when I go to Moab, am I going to be able to do this? Even though you haven't gone to Moab in 3 years, but you think you're going to go. So it becomes that whole thing of, can I use this vehicle for this kind of 5% event? Is it capable of doing that? So, which is a lot of the reasons why we're going to put that infrastructure in, even though a lot of that infrastructure may initially not get used, but it's needed, so you go out and buy the car knowing that if you wanted to use it, you could use it. So I do think that's some of those barriers. But I think that the fundamental biggest one is cost.
Others?
Well, as I mentioned before, education. There's a lot of misunderstanding about how these vehicles operate and how far you can drive, as you mentioned, and environmental and other things that impact your vehicle's driving range. There's just a gigantic list of things that can impact it. And there's a window sticker on a car brand new that gives you the average driving range of these vehicles. But as you mentioned, it's hardly ever you're going to be driving that in one day, in one city. But people need to understand that these are battery-powered cars. And so if you want heat, it's going to take battery power to heat the car. If you want air conditioning, it's going to take battery power to heat or to turn on the air conditioning. And everything you turn on decreases the driving range. And so if you speed, if you have low tire pressure, just like on any other vehicle, there's a whole bunch of things that can impact the driving range. And I'm a member of several Facebook groups. I don't make comments on it, but I just am on there to watch the comments from other people that have purchased different electric vehicles. And these are common complaints. I read, probably every week I read about somebody misunderstanding what the driving range means. And somebody just totally confused as to why in cold weather they can't drive as far as they could in warm weather. And so there's a lot of education.
You know, as part of that education is some of the savings for fuel as well, because electricity is quite a bit cheaper than gasoline. And if you charge at home, again, you're only paying 10 cents a kilowatt hour roughly, and it's roughly on average, you know, depending on how efficient the car is, as an equivalent, that's about $1 a gallon equivalent roughly. And so, and actually, we actually have a time of use rate now to try and encourage people to charge off-peak. Now, if you charge outside of this 3 to 8 p.m. window, that's when you're going to pay that 10 cents a kilowatt hour. But if you're now going to charge outside of that, you're only going to pay 5 cents a kilowatt hour, which kind of comes back to roughly, again, about 50 cents a gallon. And so if you get that education out there and recognize, well, how I actually drive, and then when I refuel, it can make a big difference on the cost of the cost of operation.
Jessica, anything to add?
Just a note with the infrastructure that you're referencing and putting in more rural locations or popular tourist locations. As educators, we need to get into those areas and complement that infrastructure with trained workforce. So we need to make sure that if you can get there and you can charge your vehicle, can you have your vehicle serviced if needed?
No, that's a fantastic point. I was actually on a committee talking with the state, and one of the big issues they were concerned about the fleet. So they have there's an operations center in Richfield, Utah, or even out other parts of the state. Their concern of moving to an electric vehicle or moving to these other types of technologies is, can they get the vehicle serviced? They would have to bring it into Salt Lake, even though the vehicle is based out in some of the rural areas. So I agree with that that's an important aspect as well, is can you get that range, can you go there, but then do you have the workforce to support the infrastructure and the vehicles in those areas as well? That's a great point.
So speaking of which, I think there is another misconception. A lot of people think that these things are maintenance free. That there's an attitude out there that because I think it's like 20 moving parts instead of 2,000 or whatever it is, the difference between and like other electric appliances, I don't think anybody in here is maintaining their coffee maker or anything else. You just basically think you can forget about it, but I'm going to let John tell you that that's not quite the case, I don't think, is it?
No, that's not the case. That's another Facebook myth that I commonly read, is that I'm doing the annual maintenance on my car. I'm changing the wiper blades. All you got to do is open the owner's manual. There are pages and pages of daily, monthly, annual, 3-year, 5-year maintenance that has to be done on that vehicle. And electric cars do have oil. They have a gearbox. It does need to be changed at a certain point. It's not motor oil, but they do have oil in them. They have some very complex cooling systems. And so it requires a specially trained person and some special equipment to flush the cooling systems. The coolant only typically lasts anywhere between 5 and 8 years, depending on the vehicle manufacturer. And so there's a service for that. Because your vehicle is stopped most of the time with what's called regenerative braking, your hydraulic brakes don't get used as much as they would in a vehicle that didn't have that. And so we actually have problems with brake systems corroding, the calipers sticking, and when you need the brakes, they may not function as well as they were intended to. Tesla, for example, if you open up the Tesla service information, which is free now to anyone, they have an annual brake inspection for everyone that lives anywhere where they put salt on the roads. So, northern Utah, and that's to make sure that the brake calipers and pistons and brake pads are still all working as well as they should. For that one time that you need a panic stop, but the regenerative braking isn't going to slow you down in a panic stop. It'll help, but your panic stop is going to be your hydraulic brakes that you rarely use, having to kick in and blend with the regenerative braking. So these vehicles you've heard and maybe driven in some to see how fast they accelerate. They have a lot of torque, and as they accelerate, the undercarriage bolts, the subframe bolts, can actually come loose. And so there's a maintenance schedule to get in underneath and re-torque some of these bolts so that they don't fall out. There's been vehicles where that has happened. The undercarriage has come loose.
You know, my favorite story about the maintenance is with, I knew someone, or I heard the story about a Chevy Volt owner, and they had only been driving it in the electric mode for years. And they actually never turned on the engine, and then the engine died on them. It actually caused the electric side to not work too. And when they got it towed and they sent it, tried to get the warranty, like, oh no, you didn't follow the. We had to actually turn the engine on to run it, to rotate the parts on that side, on the plug-in side or the hybrid side. So it's kind of
So there's a lot of maintenance. There's not as much as an internal combustion engine, but there is a lot more than wiper blades and tires, by far.
So Utah is full of drivers who like to get outdoors and drive the back roads. Are EVs right for them?
Absolutely. No, I don't think there's any difference between an EV and an internal combustion engine to be able to go out and go. You just have to make sure you have the suspension system in that vehicle to be able to, if you're going to go off-road, to be able to do that. And there are, the Rivian truck has a phenomenal, incredible suspension system that's coming out. That is, we just had 2 days ago at our facility, we had a little car show, kind of celebrating National Drive Electric Week, and we had some Rivians there, and so it was so fun to look at them. And that vehicle is, I was reading, it has the suspension system of a McLaren. So it's a supercar, it's one of those things. But obviously not everybody can afford that kind of a vehicle. But it's not, the fact that it's an electric vehicle doesn't limit its ability to then go off-road or to go anywhere else. That has nothing, there might be some other issues associated, but at least from a suspension system, I don't think it has anything.
I totally agree. There's the Ford F-150 Lightning, Chevrolet's releasing a Silverado, there's the GMC Hummer. There are vehicles built to go off-road, and there's vehicles that are built not to go off-road, just like any other internal combustion engine powered vehicle.
So I'd like to see if anybody in the audience has any questions. We have a mic that's attached to a cord here, so I'm happy to. Which mic coming in front?
There's a wireless right here.
Oh, there's one right there. Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, if you want to head up to the mic. Sorry.
Put him on the spot.
Yeah.
I've got quite a few questions, but Tesla, do they have a patent on their vehicles? I understood one time they didn't. do they have a patent, or can anybody use their technology that they've developed over time? And then efficiency, horsepower versus efficiency. Where do you find efficiency like horsepower?
Well, as far as the patents, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sure they have patents. I know I've read articles that they released their patents years ago for other people to license and use instead of just holding them all. But I don't know.
I'll make a comment. I know there's a lot of publicity about, oh, we're making it free to the world. The patent issue is a big issue, which is one of the reasons why Toyota has not gotten big into that, because they went down a different route. GM has their own set of patents, which is why GM has been one of the leaders in EVs. Tesla has their own set of patents. Again, those are guarded. I mean, I think a lot of that is kind of myth. It's a cutthroat. It's a big aspect of the business and how they go forward. So, but in terms of if you want to take the efficiency question versus the horsepower.
The efficiencies really have nothing to do with the horsepower, if I understand your question correctly.
Are you asking how do you translate an EV into horsepower? How do you an electric motor into horsepower?
Oh,
some are 90% efficient, others are way down.
okay. So the efficiencies of the electric motors, those are, well, first the electric motors have their power rating, instead of in horsepower, it's in kilowatts. And there's a conversion where you can convert that to horsepower. As far as their efficiencies, there are different types of electric motors. Some are more efficient than others. Tesla is well known for having very high efficiency everything on their vehicles, their electronics, their motors. But they're not the only ones. There are others that are right up there with them now, but they used to be out there all by themselves.
So the big thing that an electric motor has is torque, which is a little different than the horsepower. That you could have this torque, so you have this instantaneous. And I think where the other, for those car gurus like I know Ted is, who used to have the Ford Mustang 57, but those. Doing those racing like a quarter-mile distance, a little different than kind of an off-the-line where the torque on the electric motor allows it to go really fast initially, and then the horsepower kind of kicks in when you're going a long distance. My understanding now, so it's interesting, these car makers, the big thing is they're trying to see who can beat who in a race. And that's a big bragging thing, because I'm sure you've seen the videos of the Tesla Model S, beating the Porsche and the Ferrari, all that kind of stuff. And so now that's where Porsche wanted to come back and make their Taycan so they can compete with with the Tesla. So it's a big, and then I think now the big thing that's waiting for is Tesla's going to update their kind of supercar that's waiting to come out, where they've been making more of the regular street cars, and they're going to actually it's pretty funny, I think. They're adding on using some of the SpaceX technology to add on to even make it even a supercharged, so it will be the fastest car ever made. It's pretty funny but for those kind of car gurus, they definitely want to plant that flag in the sand of who can go faster. I don't know if you know.
No, I don't. Did we answer your question, or did we just dance around it?
On a sticker, you'll find CC, and my day it was horsepower.
Yeah.
Now it's CC. The greater the CC, the more power you have. But where do you find efficiency on a sticker?
I think the EPA is required. Is that? Because they do it as this like a rating to the miles driven, and that's fundamentally an efficiency. And so I think right now, like the Hyundai is the most efficient. And then I think the Tesla, kind of. So you're in that about 0.25 range to get really efficient, 0.25 kilowatt hours per mile, you know, and then you start getting into the lower ones of 0.3, and some even the worst ones are about 0.4. So it's in that range of that's how I always view the measurement of efficiency, is what is the kilowatt hours per mile. And kilowatt hours is a measurement of energy, so it's energy per distance.
Do I need the mic? My question is very simple.
Okay. And you're loud. Go ahead.
Yeah, they just flew the first electronic airplane. We also look forward to electric farm equipment, construction vehicles, even power plants that use other forms of fuel now to produce more electricity. How broad is this thing? Is it going to be really a huge, broad adaptation of this very efficient way and clean way of dealing with things?
Yeah, absolutely. There is not a product that is an internal combustion engine. Every form of internal combustion engine, those companies are scrambling to make an electric version of that, whether it's a battery electric or some other version. So John, all the students that John's teaching, they're going to have jobs, because not only are they going to have to work on the car, but you're right, there's going to be these other forms, and in a lot of ways they are a form of an electric vehicle. They're just called non-road. So the construction equipment, the agriculture equipment, I know John Deere is making agriculture, and actually this is part of the future for how do we do, one of the big issues with farming is getting farm workers, and especially those are seasonal, so now you can make autonomous vehicles that can do the farming, and it's an electric autonomous vehicle. Kennecott just announced they're moving some of their heavy equipment over. Tim wrote a wonderful piece on that, about looking at some of the mining equipment that's electric. So I think this transition is here to stay, and it's going to impact lots of other types of applications. It's not just for cars. It's and you were talking about planes. This year, about last month, I believe it was, in Utah, you actually got a permitted delivery of the first drone in Utah happened. It was IHC has the permit, and they had to deal with the state to deliver medication directly to patients, to homes, and they're using a drone to do that. So that drone, that same type of technology, that same permit, is going to transition over to passengers as well. And they like to call them flying taxis. That kind of has it's kind of interesting name to it. But that same drone technology is going to happen. I see it happening for intermediate travel. So if you got to travel about 150 miles or so, instead of hopping on a congested freeway, do you hop on a drone, which is basically a helicopter, an electric version of a helicopter, and you hop on there and you go and you bypass that traffic. Do you want to fly up to Logan? Do you want to fly down to Cedar City? Have some of these regional travel. And actually some of the attractiveness of that is they're looking to set these up at smaller airports, so you can go travel without actually having to go to the big international airport. You actually don't have to go through security. You don't have to do that because you're actually not triggering FAA regulations, because they're traveling below a certain limit. So they're actually not following FAA patterns, they're following highways. So, which is regulated by the state. So you're going to have these vehicles, it's kind of the Jetsons type of thing, but you're going to have these flying these drones following the freeways over, and it'll be a way to get around. And it's not that far away. It's really close. And I know the Department of Energy, I was just talking to the person in charge of it, he just approved about $5 billion in loans to companies that are basically announcing that, or they're developing this. And I know American Airlines just placed an order for 500 of these vehicles. So it's coming. It's not that far out. But I don't know if you guys.
I guess it'll be crowded in the skies pretty soon too. I did earlier this summer. I took a shot at trying to write a story about electric ATVs and off-road vehicles and boats and dirt bikes and all that sort of thing. And what I basically found is that nobody has them yet, or at least barely anybody has them yet. And I'm probably about 1 year out. I'm figuring that's a story I'm going to do next summer. And I think that it'll be a little bit further along by then. But that is the camping world. Anybody who's sat in a campground and listened to a generator running all night, and, those can go away. Anybody who has seen a line of ATVs roaring along, that can go away. I think that's coming, and boats too. I think we're going to see electric boats.
And I know the military is interested in, and there's a lot of projects that are trying to develop this technology for military applications as well. So.
Tim, just a moment.
Sure.
Just a note on education, we're projecting a need for technicians across multiple industries for all the electrification that's going on. So we're designing an automotive electrical engineering technology degree to not only service automotive, but also parallel industries such as the utility companies and companies like Neuro. They're going to need technically trained electrical folks to do that.
Job security. Anybody else? Question?
I have a question from our online viewers.
By all means.
Seth wants to know what steps are being taken to ensure the power grid can handle a rapid growth in EV on the road.
You always get that one, James.
Close my eyes and pray. No, it's a great question, and we actually looked at this a couple of years ago. We did a study. We hired the University of Utah to look at our system and our power grid, and we did some modeling to determine how much can we handle, would it have an impact, and what we found was that at least at the residential level, we could absorb about 50% adoption levels, and we wouldn't notice it. We would be able to handle it without any significant upgrades. Now you're going to probably have some different issues localized, especially with like commercial and industrial. You could have localized areas where you're going to have some upgrade in equipment. And so at least we see it as kind of the grid as we know it is in good shape right now for at least the next 10 years or so. Once we start getting beyond that, now we're going to have to start thinking about innovative ways we manage it. And so one of the areas will be, I'm expecting at some point we'll do some form of demand response program where we do work with those who have these systems, and we right now we have a time of use. We're trying to do pricing to shift people off of these peak, but I think we're in the future we'll do something else. But in the future, because these vehicles have computers in them, they're going to communicate. Right now, to charge an EV, they actually communicate with the charger. Basically, so the charging process that happens, it's the car that dictates. So a plug comes in, and it's the car that pulls the power. It's not the charger sending the power in. And a lot of that goes back to, as John was mentioning, the battery and the heat management system. They don't want to overwhelm the battery, so they'll regulate how much power they pull into it. So as part of that process, there's a handshake that happens where the car communicates with the charger. That same type of communication can start happening with the grid at some point. And so I think we're going to see in the future that kind of optimized communication to how we can balance all of that. So and we actually have a couple of innovative programs where we're trying to develop the technologies to make that happen smoothly. Our goal is to have it where that optimization occurs and the consumer, the user, has no idea, that doesn't notice that this is happening. So how we can balance that grid and then balance the use. So it's a great question, and near term, it's not an issue, but in the long term, it will be, and we're trying to develop the programs to be able to implement it.
Yeah.
This is going to John real quickly. You talk about a balancing scale where Tesla is holding more of the balance. Then you're saying other companies are coming close to where Tesla what companies are the ones that are coming close to where you feel is, as a consumer myself, I would want to take a look at, to go and buy?
Well, almost everybody today with a brand new released vehicle, not some carryover that's been out there for 13 years, but a brand new designed vehicle is going to be very close to where Tesla has been up to this point, and let's see. I've gone through the training for the new General Motors products, and I think their battery thermal management system is every bit as good as Tesla's. I've gone through several other manufacturer trainings that I feel they're right up there too. Kia and Hyundai have really done some good stuff with their battery thermal management. If you kind of an easy way to tell who's got a good thermal management system is to look at what they call their peak charging rate for DC fast charge, your DC level 2 charging. And if it's a really high number, like 250 kilowatt or higher, then they have a very good, you can't have that type of charging without having a good battery thermal management system. So for me, I would look, if I was in the market for a new vehicle, I would be looking at not just the price, but the, see if there's efficiencies published. There's this MPGE, miles per gallon, for the electric vehicle. And then I would just automatically look at that fast charge rate. And as was mentioned earlier, it's hardly ever that you're going to be using a DC fast charger, but you can tell, as I said, the ones that have the better systems by having the higher charge rates.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think EVs kind of got a bad rap early with, I mean, the Nissan Leaf, it came out, one of the early vehicles that came out, and it was great in the sense that it was affordable, all electric, battery electric. It was one of those first to do it. The problem was their cooling system was terrible. And so it created a lot of these expectations on that. And I think, as John was saying, the newer vehicles, as they're coming out, those problems that were experienced there are not going to be experienced now with the newer cars. I'm curious, John, have you looked at the Rivian? Have you?
Yes, we had one here. They brought one from the service center in Salt Lake. And
how do you think that battery is?
Oh, I don't know. Actually, I don't remember.
Oh, you didn't take it apart.
They just had one here for show and tell.
Yeah, test drive it.
I'd like to take one apart.
Yeah, no, I know. That's why I was curious.
Unless you guys donate one to us.
Yeah, I know, because I test drove that, and it was amazing being in a truck, and it went 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, and it went 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. It was phenomenal.
I suspect it's a pretty good.
Yeah, it's just a supercar that's with a truck bed, which is
John doesn't know any car until he spread it out across the floor. Okay. Go ahead.
I thought.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I could tie you guys up all night. Solar advocate for years and years, certified with an AppStep a few years ago. But the one quick thing, I was at the EV show the other day, and Porsche had the lock on the really hyper-fast DC charging for a year or two. Yeah. And now the Kia and the Hyundai both have wagon-sized cars, small sport utes, that are also advertising an 18-minute fast charge rate at a DC fast charger. So 2 questions. Are we going to have some of those DC fast chargers at our rest stops and our restaurants? We don't need them at home, and we don't need them at the ski areas or at the workplace, but along our restaurants and our rest areas along the freeways where they're going to be advantageous. So is that part of the plan?
Yeah, we're gonna put 20 locations throughout the state, and they'll have a 150 kilowatt charger and a 350 kilowatt charger. The 100, so what's happening in the marketplace, it's kind of bifurcating. So the regular car is going to be 150, and then the premium vehicles will be the 350. That's like your Porsches, your Hummer, you know, that's where you'll get those higher ends. And so we're going to put both chargers out. You know, it's interesting. I was actually at a Department of Energy. They had this symposium, this workshop where they brought a lot of folks together as they're trying to, they called it extreme fast charging. And how do we build this out across the country? What should we do? I was really surprised that it's interesting you mentioned that, how Porsche was there. And they were the ones who were pushing the 350. And it was really interesting. Obviously Porsche is owned by Volkswagen. Volkswagen had their Dieselgate, and they've been building out these chargers across the country. So it's by no accident that they were the ones that were pushing it. But that seems to be how the industry is going to kind of bifurcate between this kind of 150 for most new car kilowatts and 350 for the kind of premium vehicles. And just as the difference to if you're actually able to charge at those rates, I believe is 150 is something like, was it like 12, 15 minutes, something like that.
18.
Yeah, 18, okay, and then at 350 kilowatts, that's basically 100 miles in 5 minutes. So that's, so what'll happen is if you're traveling long distance, your experience won't be that much different than what it was with internal combustion. It's still gonna be different, I mean, and I think it's just going to be it's just going to be, I think in the future it's going to be different because of, I think what's going to happen is, right, you're not going to want to charge to 100%, you're going to charge to 80% to keep that battery safe. But you're also going to have the ability to communicate with the charger before you get there. So can you reserve it? And so I think what's going to happen is how we travel is going to be slightly different. You know, do you set up your travel schedule now when you can get the charging, when you can get that, and affordable charging or cheaper charging? I think for old guys like me, you know, that's going to be like a problem. That's like, oh, this is different. But I know my son, to him, it's just like, duh, of course. You know, my 20-year-old, 23-year-old who's like, yeah, of course we would do. You know, who's used to those kind of changes. So I think there's going to be how we do it's going to be different, and I don't think it's it's going to be it's just going to be different.
I know I've wondered about just that whole, the model right now is a convenience store with a bunch of junk food, and if you really have to spend even like 15 minutes there, is Maverick where you want to be? I'm not sure it is. I think it could be that you're going to see something that is maybe more inviting, someplace to sit down. Maybe you even, you know, free Wi-Fi or coffee or, you know, something else that is a little bit more of a different experience. That's another story that I sort of tried to wrap my arms around, and it's a little too early for, but I'll get there.
But I will make this comment. What we're doing, I'm going to make no apologies. We're going to be the Costco of charging. It's kind of going to be a no frills. We're not going to provide services. However, it's going to be cheap. It's going to be cheap. It'll be the cheapest way to refuel your vehicle will be at our chargers. I can guarantee you that.
Along the same lines, if we were to get a EV vehicle, not a hybrid, what kind of power should we have in our home? 220 versus 110? Because we have a son-in-law who purchased a Tesla. And if he puts it into his 110, it may or may not charge all night long.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and a lot of it depends on your home and where's your box and all that kind of stuff. Because you could add on to that an additional expense to rewire it to get the what they call the level 2 charger, so you could get, you know, anywhere between 6, maybe as high as, you know, a Tesla destination is I think 18 kilowatts. You can get 6 kilowatts up to the 18, where 110 you're basically just getting 1 kilowatt. So it's you know, I think a lot of it depends on, can you afford it, can you not afford it, what you should do. for me, at my house right now, I just have a 110. And what it does, although I think I'm gonna upgrade if my wife, so if we have multiple cars, because then now it's a different, different dynamic. But at least for the car, for most of your, and I guess it also depends, but I have charging at work, so that's another dynamic in that. So as long as you have access to charging, so I think it's a personal, so you can do it with the 110, and like you said, it's an overnight, it'll probably, if you charge about, 10 hours, you're still only gonna get about 40 miles of range, which in a daily commute, that's the, I think that covers something like 75% of everybody's daily commutes is 40 miles back and forth. So it's a 110 overnight charge should be sufficient to get you from where you want to go, except if you're going on a long distance. So so to answer your question, I think it just depends on your personal situation and your own, can you afford it, and whether or not you need to upgrade. There's definitely a convenience factor for having a faster charge, but.
If it were me, I'd try to get the 220 in your garage.
And the 220, by the way, is nothing exotic. Just about every household has that already available in the home, and the headroom of amperage to cover it easily.
Your clothes dryer, basically there are things.
Yeah, you can get the 6 kilowatts with a 30 amp, but if you wanted to get a destination charger, you'll need a 45 amp. So you'll need that adds a little bit. I think you need thicker gauge wire too, so that adds a little bit more expense. But if you just do it like what he was talking about, a traditional one, you're fine.
When I wrote a story about cheap EVs, and you can buy an old Leaf that's 10 years old for like $6,000, and it'll only go about 40 miles on a charge. But I met one guy who was charging the thing with an extension cord running out of his apartment down into so people are doing it, I guess.
So, and that's one of the things where we're going to put some of the charging infrastructure in addition to along the interstates throughout the state. We're also looking to put some in communities where there's a higher concentration of apartments and a higher concentration of those who actually don't own their own homes. That's both from a social equity standpoint, but also those are the people who would use public charging that need that fast charging. So we're definitely, that's part of our plan as well.
Yes.
I just want to know about safety. As an older person, I looked at cars and I didn't want a tiny car because it'd get smashed in an accident, and we didn't want, a great big truck either. So we have a legacy Subaru, and it's supposed to have good safety. But I look at my daughter's Tesla, and it just kind of looks lightweight, like it'd get really smashed in an accident.
I think it's actually pretty heavy, but I'm going to let others answer that.
Well, the base is, but what about everything surrounding the passengers?
Almost every Tesla has some of the highest safety scores out there.
For accidents?
From the IIHS, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're very safe.
Thank you.
Any others? I've got one more slide. Oh,
got one more question. So for electric infrastructure, Utah and everybody, a lot of people in Utah like to get out in the remote areas. And basically, are you going to run power lines out to remote areas? Or are you going to implement like grid scale batteries and solar at these chargers?
Well, I think it depends on the location. If we already have a power line, then we'll utilize that. Now will probably be the first where we would put this in. I know working with UDOT, so as part of there's what's called the federal infrastructure funding that came out. They have to develop what's called NEVI, which is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan. So for the state of Utah, they had to develop a plan for the NEVI program. And so UDOT is the one leading that. And so they have to put in on these designated corridors every 50 miles. They have to put chargers in every 50 miles. There are some locations throughout the state where if there's no cities, then there's no power lines, I can tell you. I mean, that's really as a way to think about it. And so there are some stretches along I-70 and I-80 where
do you go ahead and spend a couple $1 million running a power line out there to service somebody who is probably never going to use it except in an emergency? Or do you look, so that is, in a couple of those locations, we are looking, working with UDOT, we are looking at doing some storage on site to support that. But I would say that's more of the exception than the rule. But it's just really, it really is it just comes down to economics.
And you're not really gonna be able to like find a charging station back in the middle of, I don't know, the maze or someplace like that, but you also can't find
the
gas.
bird trail, the bird, yeah.
I think there could be a niche business for somebody who can put a giant battery on the back of their truck and drive around and bail people out who have run out of power in the middle of nowhere somewhere. But we'll see how that works. Okay, anything else? I've got one last slide, and it is check out the shop. If you have time, I encourage you to head back over that way, and these guys will go with you, to see Weber's Auto Shop. They've been here for only a couple of years, and it's a pretty impressive shop all the way around, but also in particular just with regard to their EV and hybrid shop. You can see a Tesla splayed out on the wall. You can see every kind, or not every kind, but many different kinds of these batteries, which are just huge, and they sit, they sit pretty low, but it's very interesting. So I encourage you to stop by and check it out. And thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it very much. Thanks to our guests. Thanks to everybody. Appreciate it very much. Take care.